Hello, I'm Frank Conkling, and this is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS Pro workshop. And on this workshop, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about sort of more advanced functions and some of the hidden things inside the parcel fabric that are useful for looking at identifying and correcting parcel problems. All right. To begin with, again, as usual, the QR code down in the lower right corner is actually a link over to our website where you'll find out who we are, what we do, how we do it. Also, you'll get a sign up link at the very bottom of the first page to sign up for our monthly newsletters, in which you get invites to go and attend these recordings live. You'll also find you have links over to our blog post and little tips and tricks that we have on there. Just a reminder, Panic Consulting is an ESRI business partner, have been for almost since our existence. We are the first business partner in the world, actually, to go and get the parcel management specialty designation. And we also have our release ready specialty designation in state and local. So let's go ahead and start. So what we're going to do is sort of talk about first the parcel fabric, and we won't spend a whole lot of time on why it's a good idea, but then we'll start talking about parcels a little bit and some of the little dirty secrets that nobody really talks about. And we're going to start looking at the sort of breadcrumbs that are in the parcel fabric to help us find problem parcels. And we'll look deeper and deeper into that. We'll see how much time we actually have at the end to talk about some of the fixes on these. And we'll see. It's interesting. The more I dug in to some of the things that are in there, the more I realized, well, maybe we're not going to be able to fix very many things in this hour that we're going through. But first, let's talk about the parcel fabric and why you really want to think about the parcel fabric. When you've got the parcel fabric put together for your parcels and it's configured correctly, you take and do an analysis on what you used to do and versus how you do it now. You actually can realize that you can do more things with less effort because you let the software finish the work for you. The parcel fabric basically does things like it converts COGO, it ensures the parcels have lines, ensures all the lines have points on them, automates the creation and modification of attributes, creates historic parcels, calculates COGO values, goes and marks the quality of the COGO in there. So it's little hidden things throughout here. All right. And that's great. It's great. And we find that many of our customers, once we put them into the parcel fabric and we've configured their data and really looked at the efficiencies of it, they can do the work in almost half the time. But that's not really, once you get into it, there's other things that the parcel fabric is doing. And here's one of those dirty little secrets. The secret is that parcels are a mystery to those of us that even work on them every single day. We work on them, but if you ask someone, how good are your parcels? Nobody really knows. We think they're good, but do we have little hidden things out there that are not really representative of what it is? And the mystery is always, okay, who can answer? Who did it? What were they do? What was it done? When was it done? Where? Why was it done? All of those things. And they don't always reflect the reality of what the deed was, or the subdivision plat, or the survey, or whatever the source document was. And the question is, how well do they reflect reality, or are they just cartoons? The question is, for example, are the parcels the correct size? Do they have the correct dimensions on there? Are they drawn correctly? Is it the correct area? Is it the correct location? And then what deed caused the change? Was there a change on here so that we can trace back what that is? Who performed the update? When was it corrected or changed and modified? And when they made that modification, why and what changes occurred as a result of that parcel? So it's a different way, a different focus once you move into the parcel fabric of rather than just focusing on creating a map of parcels, you really start looking and and creating this library of land record information. As many of you have heard, I like to think of it as being a curator of digital land records. You start building up this history of what is this supposed to reflect? What's the source document? What did it say on that source document? Who created these changes? What changes did they do? And that's what the parcel fabric does as they get in here. And including things like attribute quality. The attribution of a parcel is important. The problem is most of us have very few ways that we can go and check the quality of them. And it's just simple things. Is every single field that's supposed to be populated populated? Are those values in there? Are they good quality values? Or is it something that somebody stuck in because they really didn't know what to do? And that's part of sort of ensuring that your parcel fabric is configured correctly. You look at every single attribute and you say, where does this come from? What are the limitations on what values can be stored on here? And you start putting in place attribute rules to go and verify that. Those attribute rules are not just calculation attribute rules, which goes and makes sure that anything new gets calculated, but you might also put some validation rules in place to say, I want to check for areas where a certain a certain attribute has a value in there and whether what that value might be. So it's not just attribute rules with calculation attributes rules on there, but validation rules also. And hopefully at the end, I'll show you how to go and validate some of those rules on here. So you want to make sure that the attributes of your parcels are valid on here. But then there's other things that you want to find. For example, in the parcel fabric, there is a not just a parcel record workflows tab, but there's a quality driven tab. And there's a series of tools on here that help you go and find these parcels that are problematic. For example, this one here, the highlighting gaps and overlaps. And by the way, this tool is now at ArcGIS Pro 3.5. This is also a geoprocessing tool where you can run it against the entire database and then output it out to its own separate feature class and look at this. Well, let's actually look and see what this is doing. Let's go over here. Let's go to gaps and overlaps. And I'm editing in here. And on the quality driven tab, there is this highlight gaps and overlaps. Now, what this does is it says, first of all, I can tell you what it doesn't do. It does not use the topology engine. It does not invoke that topology engine that Esri has put in place of almost everything we do since Arc Info coverage is, where it goes and runs through a three-step process where it's first cracking or intersecting all the feature classes in our topology object. So it inserts vertices everywhere. And then it's clustering those vertices together within that cluster tolerance to make sure that, everything is the same. And then it validates them. So it goes and ensures that the rules are followed. Well, the highlight gaps and overlaps does not actually do that. The highlight gaps and overlap uses spatial statistics against the polygons to figure out what actually is going to be done and whether or not there's a gap or an overlap between them. And the way it works is that you have this maximum width. So it's going to look for gaps and overlaps within X number of feet, and you identify that. And then if you have more than one parcel type, you can tell it, hey, to just look at one parcel, or you can tell it, look at everything that's visible in here. And that's what I'm going to do here. And then how do you show your gaps? How do you show your overlaps in here? All right. And those are the settings that you get when you do the pull down. Now, what this does is if I go and click on this right now, it runs through my visible extent and checks for polygon gaps or overlaps on here. And when I do that, it then goes and identifies them. And if you remember, I said the gaps should be red and the overlaps should be green. And I also can see that I have this dashed line around my extent notifying me that yes, in fact, there is a gap and an overlap in here. Real quickly, let's look at some of this. So for example, in here, I have a gap and overlap, and looking at it probably is that this one point here is not coincident with the point to the south of it. So there is a modification that has to be done there. It should be pulled together. The tool you use to do that is actually the Align Features tool here. Align Features tool allows you to go and identify a buffer area or a tolerance area. Let's just go 5 feet here. It allows you to draw a line and say, okay, take and everything within that tolerance area, all of the vertices, all the lines, all the points, pull them together so it follows that gap. It redefines the geometry of everything that's displayed right now. I also have the option down here to tell it to do without having to do a selection. So I want to make sure that that's always selected. And then finally, in the method on here, be aware that at release 3.5, Esri changed the default method from fit the shapes to the path to fit endpoints to the path. And if you use it to go and do this, it will only go and move the endpoints. To go and use it to fix gaps and overlaps, you should be using the fix shapes to path and tell it go ahead and do this. And when I go and do this, I can tell it go ahead and check this again. And sure enough, it no longer has that gap or overlap on it. Now, let me go back out now a little bit more. And here, and check my gaps and overlaps again. And it will find a couple others. Again, this is fairly easy to do. You can use this not just on straight lines, but you can also use this on curved lines. I'm going to go and use the endpoint curve here, and I'm going to tell it to start my curve here, start my curve there, and now I can tell it, I can snap it to an existing point, or if I know a radius, I can hit R and input the radius on there. I'm just going to go and tell it, go ahead and snap it to there, go and let it snap them together and re-highlight just to see, and sure enough, that one is gone now. All right. So gaps and overlaps, one of the ways to do it is to use the Align Features tool. Another way to do it is if, in fact, you've got some issues in which you might have 2 points that are slightly far apart, and I don't see it on here. You can use the Merge Points tool. Yeah, something like this is going to be an Align Features issue here. You can use the Merge Points tool, which you go and take 2 points, merge them together, and consolidate the features so that it's represented there. Thing to remember, though, is that the highlight gaps and overlap tool does not change the geometry. It does not, it identifies gaps and overlaps on here, but it doesn't require you to fix them. Again, this is unlike some of the other topology fixes that you might have. This does not do it. And it's perfectly safe within the parcel fabric, unlike some of the topology fixes. So this is sort of one of the earlier and easier ones to do. This one is one that I highly recommend every single time you go in there and work on a record. Immediately go and do a gaps and overlaps just to see whether you've got something in the surrounding area that you can clean up and just continue to make that part of your QA/QC on every single record that you're going and working on, every single workflow. So this is some other areas, which is these are some very interesting ways that you can find problem parcels in which you've got a mapped parcel in which the COGO values do not reflect what the actual distances are on them. And let's look at this. So this is again on the quality driven tab, and it's over here under the parcel layers. And this works on an individual layer at a time. And what happens is you can tell what you're looking for. You can look at connection lines, you can look at parcel lines, or you can look at polygons. The parcel lines, the distance mismatch, again, when I go and do this, it will ask me for what type of parcel. If I have multiple parcel types in here, it will go and identify that, and it will go and put up a display field here. And that display field is basically here. And if I look at what it's actually doing is it's creating definition queries in which it's actually looking at the absolute value of the shape length, and they look at where the arc length divided by the shape length is greater than 5%, and that's for a curved line and it's got retired by as null or where it's current and historic. It basically is looking at identifying where these parcels have differences greater than a half of a foot on here. And I'm just going to go, and that's the one I just added. These are display layers. All right, and let's go in here and look at this. And it goes and identifies and shows up. For example, here is a shape length is 97.17 feet, but the actual distance that's on here is 91.95. So it's about 6 foot difference. If I go over here and actually display this, it will display not just the the actual line, but how much is mismatched. If I go and tell it to go ahead and label this, it will label it and identify, label these here. We'll identify what that is. And there's my label where it shows me the mismatch on here. All right. So the question is, well, how do you fix this? This is one of those where it's not an easy fix at all. This is one of those things where you have to then go and realize, is there a problem with the greater mapping on here? Or is it just that I was mapping something that the actual information I had as far as where the corners of these parcels were, where the previously matched parcels were located, it doesn't match up with the actual information I have stored on here. Um, this is a way to identify where there's possible problematic elements in here on here. Um, Chris, I see that I do have a comment in here. Gaps and overlaps are often the result of two different land records not quite matching. How do you determine which record takes precedent and then tell ArcGIS what to map to? So is the newer record taking precedence? The reality is no. It's a common misperception. Um, I actually have a whole video on why parcel mapping is so difficult, and it's because there's a general misunderstanding of what a legal description actually is. A legal description, without going too far into it or too distracting, is when you have information stored on a legal description, it's attempting to get the surveyor or the person who's trying to understand where this property is located. It's attempting to get them to identify monuments or corners which actually determine the actual boundaries of the property. In the United States, our land is not defined by the courses, by the directions and distances. Our land, the actual legal definition of our property, is where the corners are located. And the legal descriptions are attempting to point you to those corners, point you to where the actual physical monument is, if there's a physical monument, or where the corner is located, whether it has a monument or not. So the question isn't always it's easy as saying, oh, that's what I should use all the time, because it then goes into an analysis of who prepared that legal description. Is it a result of a recent survey? Does that recent survey have more precise distance measurements than the older archaic or ancient survey did? And do either of them actually point you to a found monument, what the original monument location is? So the answer is not quite as simple as saying always take the new one. It's not always take the new one. It's always take the accurate one. And again, most parcel mappers they don't have access to all that data. They don't do field surveys. So it's not a bad idea to take the newer one, but you just want to look and see if you have a survey that might tell you that maybe that distance is off. Maybe they did find a monument there. And if you don't have a survey, you just have the actual legal description, then you're going to have to trust that and try to figure it in. Another thing you want to do is you want to look at, and this is sort of, I know I'm diverging here, but you want to look at other evidence as far as where these parcels are and what they're supposed to attempt. If you're in fact in something like this is a very rural area, I'm going to turn these off, rural area, you're not going to have a whole lot of physical evidence of where this property is located. But as you move around into more urbanized areas, you'll start seeing things like walls and corners and elements like that. This is a very rural county, sorry. But you will start seeing those things, and you want to start comparing it to, what these actual locations are on here. All right, this looks like this was an old subdivision where they've actually abandoned roads and haven't mapped them. But you want to start looking for physical evidence on there. All right, I'm going to move on from here. The identifying problem features, the display areas here, these are actually really helpful. You can actually go in there and find, okay, let's find where these mismatches are, where you've got lines that don't reflect what it says on the COGO. If you want to try to fix it from here, you're going to have to do some more research. But it will do things like tell you where, in fact, you have extra vertices on your lines. Or these extra vertices, by the way, they might be a tessellated curve or a densified curve, or where these lines are too short, where you have short segments, like a tenth of a foot segment that really shouldn't be there. That's a result of mappers not paying real close attention to what's there. It's also the result of some of the old ArcMap tools, things like extend lines. Extend lines would not go and remove or move vertices. It would just extend it and leave that old vertice there. So this is just a result of looking at sort of the quality of those lines in here. Parcels, it tells you where there's extra vertices along the boundaries. Those used to be called pseudonodes, but it also will help you identify those and see whether or not that's causing any problems on here. Here's one that we use a lot, and this is one where we find where the parcels themselves, they look like they're mapped correctly, but when we actually start doing a comparison of what the stated area is versus the calculated area, and by the way, just to clarify a couple terms, the stated area is the area that appears on the deed. The calculated area is the mapped area. That's the shape area converted into whatever the map units are that we're using. And then we will often go and put a definition query up there where we'll say, okay, well, show us where the stated area divided by the calculated area is greater than 20%. That's what this actual definition query is here. And if I go and look at that on here, where I've got a mismatch here, let's go and go here to an area problem. And let's actually turn these on. It will identify that, in fact, in this case, I have a couple problems. I have, in this parcel here, I have where it's supposed to be the map acres is actually mapped out as a half of an acre, 0.49 acres, but the stated area says it's only 0.24 acres. Well, it's not fatal. It's something where you've got data that doesn't match up with what you've got mapped. It's reflective of something that may not be mapped correctly. If we look at this other one here, this one, the calculated area, says it's only 0.32 acres. Next to it, it says that, oh, no, this shapefile is supposed to be, excuse me, the stated area is supposed to be a half an acre. So the odds are the line separating these two is not mapped correctly. There's a mismap here. And I would go and research and see maybe this parcel, these two parcels were not mapped correctly, and that line has to be adjusted, or there's something that's not right here. Again, this is one of those problem areas that, again, none of these are fatal, but it's just something that's hidden. And when you say your parcels are 100% accurate, you just want to make sure that, yes, these little quirks in here get resolved to figure out where these problems can pop up for you. This shows up in another area here, and that misclosures. So within the parcel fabric, anytime you create a parcel using a traverse tool, all right, it goes and creates and stores on the polygon that's created as a result of that. It stores the misclosure distance and the misclosure ratio. The distance is the difference here from where that final leg moved and did not create and did not go and actually close or finish up at the exact coordinates that it started from. The ratio is the perimeter of the overall traverse divided by that distance. That's it. All right. And this is an indication that your information, your traverse, um, may not have a good closure. And again, it becomes one of those things where you don't automatically say, oh, you got to throw it out. It might be that it's a very rural land, that the information's not that great, or it might be that some of the information was input incorrectly. One of the things you want to recognize about traverse closures is that they are not reflective of accuracy. They are reflective of the precision of the measurements that you're inputting. So if in fact I have information that's being input to the closest foot, my misclosure would be higher than if I were having something where the information was entered to the closest thousandths of a foot. So again, a misclosure distance and a misclosure is reflective of precision as much as anything else. Whether or not those bearings, those directions are precise enough for me. And you see this a lot on older surveys when they were measuring with maybe 1 degree theodolites or 1 degree transits instead of having some of the 1 or 2 second theodolites that we have now. So it's a reflective of precision, not accuracy. And I just want to make sure you remember that. Well, you can actually go and search for that. And we actually have here an area. Let's go over to it. Let's look at misclosure issues. If we go in here, we have a couple parcels. If we look at the definition query we have here, we're saying that the misclosure distance is greater than 10 foot. Well, if we actually look at these polygons here, again, in with the parcel fabric, it goes in every time you create a traverse, and it does not do it on ones that are not created as part of traverse, but if you have created it with a traverse, it will go and record what the ratio is and what the actual distance is. And when I look at this and say, well, wait a minute, this misclosure distance of 33 or 3,370 feet, that's almost as much as the overall perimeter of the actual parcel. So there is a difference there, and that this was not input correctly. There's something there that's not correct, and I would go and look at it and possibly remap it. Same thing here. It might be that this again, this is a 200-foot misclosure, so I suspect in that might be a problem. Let me go do something here. Let's go and look at this parcel, and then let's activate the record of that parcel. All right. And then let's go and select all of the lines associated with that. Again, some of the tricks that you can do with this. All right, let's go ahead and do that. And we can see, oh, this was converted over. It may not actually have been edited in here. So this may have been, here's some 4,000, 4,000. There's a whole bunch of elements in here. These are my parcel lines. Very small lines in here. Sorry, go ahead and let's only go and select these. So I've got some very small lines in here. So there's several very small lines in here. It might be right in here, or it might be in here. I've got issues with this entire traverse that I want to go in and look at um, on here. So again, it doesn't fix it. It just says you might want to look at this because this is one of those things where you could have an issue here in the very near future that your parcels don't close by a certain amount, and you want to go and verify whether this is the actual problem that you're dealing with. All right. So again, that's a misclosure issue. It's a tool that and by the way, the misclosures and the areas, they don't come standard with the parcel fact. We go and create them just to allow us to go and look and analyze the data a little bit better and give us a better indication of what we have as far as quality data and not quality data on here. There's also another tool here that was added at 3.5. This is one where it's finding the disconnected parcel points. Within the parcel fabric, every time there's a point, all right, every point in here, and this is a good example here, we have points here that look like they're not connected. Well, even if we turn on our historic parcels, these points, let's go in and select them and see what's going on with them. We have a couple of points here. We have a record associated with those points. All right, here's another point here. We have records associated with these points, but we don't seem to see anything else about them. All right. And the question is, are they supposed to be there? Is it still there? Or are these points orphaned? There's many different ways you can orphan them. Everything from deleting the lines or the point or lines of the polygons that were originally as part of them when these points were created to conversion from other formats, including the old ArcMap parcel fabric, where you would have unjoined points and you would have all sorts of garbage or sludge hanging out there. You would often have these disconnected points. This geoprocessing tool will allow you to go and find these disconnected points and go and export them out into a separate point feature class on here. I'm not going to run it here. It's going to go and identify them and give me a layer on here pointing out where these things are. But these are the problems that you have. Is this fatal? No, it's not a fatal problem on here, but it's something that you might want to go in and fix. So if I go back here again, just to here, and let's just go and say, let's only select this one. Let's then go and activate the record on here. There's the record. Let's select everything associated with that record. I've got a whole bunch of points in here, whole bunch of points in here, and that's all I have are points. This may have been an old conversion that got brought in, and those points are necessarily not any more of this record on here, or it may have been that there was a problem with this before. In this case, you can go and just delete these points if you're sure they are not part of a valid element on here. You can delete those points. By the way, I have other points in here. There's a whole bunch of things in here. I can delete these to ensure that this is still valid. I always want to go back here and tell it to rebuild my extent and see whether or not it's going to go and input these in again. If I miss something in here, or is this complete as I've got? So it looks like I just cleaned those up. So these disconnected parcel points, these are just extraneous points that have been orphaned somehow through working this. By the way, this is demo data I'm working on. It's been run through the ringer so many times. We have every kind of problem in this data that you can find. Least squares adjustment. Let's talk about another way that we can find issues with this. I want to be sure that I point out least squares adjustment. You should not use least squares adjustment to adjust all your parcels. You should use least squares to do a consistency check inside of a single subdivision And you can use a least squares adjustment within a single subdivision where they all came from one set of measurements. Otherwise, just be very careful. The reason why I'm saying this is that once you understand how parcels are created, how they're described, for example, we have a parcel, which is a meets and bounds description. And let's say my origin connection comes here, and then I go to a point of beginning. And my point of beginning then describes it this way, all right? In here, the only thing that actually impacts the location and the adjustment are here is the location of this point and the location of things on here. If I include in my least squares adjustment things outside of that, such as maybe there's a corner down here that has a new location on it, and I include this in that least squares adjustment, it's going to move these, and it's not going to be correct as far as where the original description is on there. You want to be careful using least squares adjustment, and it really should not be used against your overall parcels. Inside of a subdivision, great. Inside of a single meets and bounds description, great, but not against the big thing. Don't include elements outside those individual descriptions. So let's go down here to consistency checks. What the consistency check does is it goes and actually analyzes the bearings and distances on the lines that are part of that, goes and runs them. So the process is you select the parcels, you run the consistency check, and then it goes and displays a bunch of adjustment layers for you. And you can see where the adjustments are, where it thinks it might have some bad lines and such in here. So let's go and look at this. We go and turn this misclosure off. And let's go back to a bookmark with consistency check. So on this consistency check, again, what I would do is I would go and select a bunch of parcels. And really all I have to do is select the parcels. I don't need the points. I don't need the lines. Only the parcels is all I need to go and have on here. And I would even say you should remove the stuff that's outside of that parcel, outside of that subdivision when you're doing this analysis. All right. And then up over the quality consistency check, it will go and analyze this and tell you what you have selected, what it's going to do. And it'll go through the analysis and give you a warning. And then it will go and pop up the actual display area on here. And this is the display group that it does. And when I turn this on, it will go and display a couple of different layers. It will display adjustment vectors for how these individual points, if we were to go and balance this out, how it would be adjusted. It will go and display those points that are on here, the distances, whether or not there's an outlier in here, whether or not some of these don't quite line up on here. It's something that's a good idea to go and run a consistency check. If you're inputting all of the traverses and building a traverse for a subdivision, run that consistency check and it will often tell you whether or not you've got input lines that are invalid characters, or maybe the bearings are going the wrong way and such, that sort of thing. It will tell you all of that. It's a good idea to go and run this and tell you whether or not they're balanced. Now, one thing I want to go and sort of reinforce, the consistency check does not make it more accurate. The consistency, even the least squares adjustment, doesn't make it more accurate. What it does is it balances it out amongst the information that you have. All right. So if you've got information that doesn't seem to fit, it'll point out to where maybe you ought to check this line, or maybe you ought to check if there's a bunch of vector adjustments here that says maybe these bearings are a little bit off in here. You want to go and check those. But it doesn't really make it more accurate, it just makes it adjusted and balanced out amongst itself. All right, that's consistency check. Again, very important tool. Just make sure it's used for the correct thing. It doesn't make your data better. It makes it balanced and makes hopefully you're reflecting what's on there. Consistency check results. Validating the attribute rules. This is one in which we don't have um, a lot on here. I just realized there's another comment on here. What is the adjustment adjusting to? A fixed point each. So let's go back there once. That's a really good question on here. So within the consistency check, let's look at it here. So over here, there's actually under least squares, there's two different ways to do this. There's a consistency check. The consistency check does not care about the actual location. It cares about whether or not the directions and distances seem to form a very tightly formed network, and whether there's outliers in there, whether there's something that might be input incorrectly. It does not use control points. However, the weighted adjustment is one in which you also include control points. And this is one in which you have to have more than one control point. You have to have multiple control points. And what it does is it not just balances out those bearings and distances, but it balances how they fit between those control points. So be aware that there's two different elements in the least squares. One is check my dimensions, make sure they're valid. Check my COGO values. And secondly, check them within control points. And that's where you want to make sure your control points are also included in there. The consistency check can be done against anything. It's only checking within those things that you have selected. The weighted, you have to have control points in order to do a weighted adjustment. And once it gives you the adjustment with all the adjustment display, you can then say, go ahead and apply it, and it will move it so that it balances within those control points on here. So there's actually two different processes here. Consistency check, everybody should be using that if you're putting in a subdivision. The least squares adjustment, you only should use that if you have good control points on that subdivision or on that area that you're doing. Please, as a surveyor, please don't adjust a section of parcels just because you have new section corners. Please don't do that. All right. Hopefully that answers your questions on there. All right. So then validating the attribute rules. This is one in which a lot of people don't pay attention to. But in order to do this, let's start with this. Let's start and looking at every one of the parcels that are inside. Every one of the parcel types inside of a parcel fabric have attribute rules associated with it. Some of them, like here, we have calculation attribute rules, which automatically calculate things. But even if they have a validation rule. This is the minimum validation rule. And basically it says, show me everything, or let me put it positively. Every line, every polygon, every point that's in the parcel fabric is supposed to have a created by record. It's supposed to have a value in the created by record. If it doesn't, it's breaking the rules immediately. All right. Now, I've been asked by several people well, is this fatal? Is this a really bad problem? The answer is it's not. But the best analogy I can come up with is that this is sort of like a cancer cell. It's sitting there, and sooner or later it's going to pop up and say, there's problems with this because this is a rule that was established originally by ESRI at 2.1. I think it was their second release. They said, we've got to start putting these in there. And this is a rule that that says everything that's in here needs to have a a a value in the created by record. Doesn't matter about the other stuff, but the created by record, this is the one we're going to check on. And and there's easy ways to check that. There's harder ways to do it. You know, if I were to go and do an easy way to do it, I can open up my attribute table on here, and I can run through here, and I can go to my created by record, right? And I can say, I can just go ahead and create a query and say, show me where my created by record is null. And it will go and give me, again, the results and show me, in fact, I have 74 lines that that break this rule. And I can go to every one of the current and historic inside the parcel types and do the same thing. Or I can use my my error inspector and go and find these for the validation rules. So how do you go and use the error inspector for the validation rules? First thing you do is you add the error layers, and it's actually added to the table of contents. If you don't add the error layers, you cannot get the attribute rules in your error inspector. And then it will go and check batch rules. It also checks validation rules on here. And the one that we're going to look at is the every feature must have a record. It's again, it's looking for null values in the created by records field. So on here, I can go in here and I can go and I can see add, right click on a feature class that's in the parcel fabric and say add my error layers on here, and it will go and add them to me. Here's the error layers. They are not by default added. Now I can go in here to my edit tab and my error inspector. On the error inspector, I now, since I have error layers in here, I now have the option to do not just my topology, but my error layers. Now, when I look at this, let's go move this out to bigger. Move it down to here. Now, when I've got this, now I can go and say, okay, what am I going to look at? What are the rules I'm going to evaluate? In this case, whether I'm going to evaluate batch calculations. No, I just want to do my validation ones. And I could just do the visible extent or my full extent. Let's just do the visible and let's go and validate it against here. In this case, I have none of them in here. Um, there we go. So here is one of the ones here. If I go here and I go and look at this line, here's some of the lines. And if I look here, I have no created by record values stored in there. Now, the question is, how do I fix this? This becomes problematic because it turns out that I'm retrofitting now into here. There is a way to fix it. I can go and say, okay, now that I've zoomed to this one, I could select this parcel. I could select this parcel here. I can say activate that record. All right, I can then go and select this line. All right, unselect that parcel. Select that line, those two lines, and I can say assign them to this record. So it now has the correct value in here for me. And it will go and remove that from there. So that's how you go and fix it, is find the parcel adjacent to these lines or find the lines associated or create a new record and then assign those features to that new record on here. So again, you want to make sure that you find these and go through here. Slides. So once we've done that, you then open up the error inspector and you flip it over to, instead of the topology, you're looking at the error layers for the rules, the attribute rules, and what you want to check. Click evaluate, and it will then go and find them to you. You can see where you may have problems on here, and you're going to begin to identify where these things are. All right. So before we go any further, do we have any questions or comments on here?
None in the chat right now.
Thank you, sir. All right, then. I'm going to go and cut this off. I hope you all enjoyed this presentation. Stick around. We'll do some more discussing it. And thank you all. See you next time. Bye.